Hi, it's Grace here. We don't all have the luxury of living in Cork, but if you do or you can visit during Cork Pride, please check out a talk I'm doing on queer Irish ancestors as part of a Women versus Everything live recording. This will be happening on the 30th of July in the Cork School of Music. That's the 30th of July in the Cork School of Music, starting at 12 p.m. Check out my Instagram at Love and Disgrace or any Cork Pride literature for more information. See you there! This episode was recorded about a month before its release date. Therefore, some of the issues Jess and I talk about in our general chit-chat section may have changed. Enjoy the show. Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Women versus Everything. This is a podcast. I'm Grace with my lovely co-host Jess.
Hello.
And every episode, we take a badass or notable woman from history, whether she's famous for right or wrong reasons. We talk about her life, and one of us also goes away and researches blindly the themes that were going on in the background of her life. And we sew that all together on air, her story and all the stuff that was happening in the world at the time that she would have had to face up against to get to where she needed to get. And so far it's worked.
Yeah, so far so good. And we have occasional kind of interviews and other episodes, and we were just talking about some new exciting things that we might be bringing for you guys very soon. So watch this space.
Yeah, we've made a huge effort, I'm sure flawed, but we are trying our best to tell stories from all over the world, from gender diverse people, from women with disabilities, women of colour, queer women. You know, we've also tried to cover all of history. Our Hatshepsut episode is from, I don't know,
1500 BC or something, wasn't it?
And we've covered some women who are still alive today.
Yeah. So it is a very broad interpretation of history that we are using here.
Yes. Speaking of broad interpretations, do you want to tell the lovely people how we're not historians, Jess?
Oh yeah, no, we're super not at all. We are very much learning as we go with this, and we don't want to present ourselves as experts. We do as much research as we can, we learn as much as we can, we try and use a wide variety of sources, but we're not historians. So if you are a historian of any kind, come on our show. We would love to talk to you. We love talking to people who have more expertise than we do in whatever area. So that would be great to hear from you if you are one of those people. You can find us on the internet in all of the places. We are WV Everything Pod on Twitter. We are also WV Everything Pod on buymeacoffee.com.
Mm-hmm.
And we are Women vs Everything on Instagram and on Patreon and on Facebook.
That's right. And we really want this to be a collaborative effort. So if you don't feel like you want to come on and do an episode with us, you can also just give us an email, womenvseverything@gmail.com, or on our social media if there's something we've missed in an episode or something we've gotten wrong, or if there's also some cool people out there that you think we should do an episode on.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of that covered, how are you doing, Grace?
Oh God, I am in, asthma nerd hell.
I'm sorry, that sucks.
I think a few episodes ago I spoke about how I thought I'd long COVID because I was getting really bad headaches after having COVID about 3 months ago. I had sinusitis and I've had 2 courses of steroids, which is like dodgy because I'm always on steroid inhaler and nasal spray. The first course of steroids was great, let me tell you. It was a high I wanted to chase for a long time. And then the second course was shit. I just finished it yesterday. So I just have all the bad side effects like not sleeping, feeling exhausted. And my sinusitis is still here. Yay.
Oh, that really sucks.
Yeah, so poor Jess got an email from me yesterday saying like, you need to be the happy one tomorrow. Because I'm just Obviously with lack of sleep and physical ill health, my mental resilience is quite poor. And I found stuff about this research for this episode very triggering. We're also in the time where Roe versus Wade is being appealed.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even. The new National Maternity Hospital in Ireland has been planned to be opened, being run by the Catholic Church,
Oh
which
no.
is, that's always a great idea. What could ever have gone wrong there?
Oh,
That's a
it's not
future
like
episode.
there's any historical precedent for that not being a great idea or anything.
That is a future episode I need to do, but honestly, I need to be at my most mentally resilient to do it.
That's really fair.
Yeah, and I'm also finding like the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp case really triggering, aside from
Mm-hmm.
it's very triggering, it's very upsetting, and it's very sad. And I think people are in so much glee about finally catching a woman in a lie about these accusations that
Yeah.
that's being missed. It's a horrific case. And yeah, it's quite hard because I fall asleep scrolling Reddit, and I just can't even do that at the moment because it feels a bit like the world is on fire at the moment. Yeah.
It really does. And honestly, same. I'm also finding that whole thing so upsetting. And it's, I think so many people, whichever kind of side they're on, they're being, gleeful is the right word. People are gloating about it and people are watching it like it's entertainment. And I just think this whole fucking garbage fire of a situation is going to do so much harm to so many survivors who don't have the power and the privilege and the platform that those two have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's enraging.
Yeah, and it is so everywhere, and it's like you're watching someone, and you can see she's lying. You can see she's overacting, and it's terrible, but she's using those very triggering words that are familiar to survivors, and then someone has put that over funny music, and it's just very painful. It's no matter how much it's dressed up or made fun and quirky, it's painful. It's painful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing I want people to remember. And I've seen kind of variations on this theme on various things involving public figures, but like they will never see the things that you say about them on social media. But like your friends who are survivors, they will.
Yes.
So just bear that in mind, I think, is something I would like people to take away from this.
Yes, that's a really valid point. But I mean, Jess, you've had a way better week.
I have had a good week, actually, to be fair. Yeah. I went to Spain for a few days because our wonderful friend Steph, who we both know from Oxford, got married.
Congrats, Steph.
I went out to the wedding reception in Spain and spent a few days there having a little holiday, which was lovely. I got in the sea and I got a little bit sunburnt, and I ate a lot of gelato and drank a lot of Spanish coffee and sangria, and I went on a boat, which was really fun. It was just a really good time. And now I'm looking out of my window where it's grey and raining, and I'm like, why did I come back though? I could podcast from a beach, right?
Absolutely. And you do work from home full time, so.
It's true. Someday I will podcast from the beach.
Yes, please. Someday we shall both podcast from the same beach at the same time. Absolutely.
Yes. Life goals. What have you been watching, reading, listening to this week? Anything fun?
No, I mean, I basically re-binged Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
It's so good. It's so good. I love it so much.
Oh my I had a friend date on Sunday, like someone that I've only known in a group context, and we went for brunch together alone for the first time. I was like making a joke because she was wearing this awesome skirt the last time I saw her, and I was like, oh, I hope you don't mind, but I ordered the same skirt. And then I was like, it's okay though, because I couldn't find your skin suit in the shop. And then I'm like, please tell me you've seen this series so you know the joke I'm making.
Oh, God.
I want to give a shout out to someone I've been following on social media who's posting a lot of fucking cool stuff.
Oh, yeah, please do.
Summer Tothil, SommerTothil. She's like a massive feminist, and she's in Australia, and her content she's posting is so good. It's my favorite thing in the world, where it's taking boring research and statistics and presenting it in a way that's meaningful and makes sense. And she's
love that.
got a great like resources section with stuff about DV, with stuff about just all the difficult topics in the media at the moment. But yeah, I'm in love with her. So hi, Summer. I messaged her and she messaged me back. Oh my God.
Oh,
It's love.
That's great. Well, I will follow her. We haven't talked about an Australian woman on the show yet, have we? Have we? I don't think we have.
No, we haven't, but not my next one, but the one after is going to be Australian for me.
Oh, okay. Exciting.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of internationality, hi, America. You're our biggest listener.
Hey, folks. How you doing?
Thank you for taking the Brits off that spot. But Ireland is the second highest, so go Ireland.
Oh, come on, Brits. We've got to catch up
No! Well, this week's episode is also in America.
Yes, it is. Do you want to tell the lovely listeners about the details I gave you?
Yeah, so the themes that Jess gave me was the dates 1918 to 2020, West Virginia, country road song, racial segregation, schools and workplace, NASA and the space race, and Black women in STEM. Very, very exciting. So, Jess.
This week's episode is about Katherine Johnson,
Ooh.
who, if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, you may have heard of. That was my kind of original source of inspiration for this episode. I fully intended to rewatch it before recording this episode. I haven't because I ran out of time, but it's great. So if you haven't seen it, I really recommend it.
Yeah, and I think we could do some sort of a watch party with our Patreons.
Yes, that would be really fun.
Yeah, let's do that.
Feminist movie night.
Squee!
I'll even live tweet it as we go.
Oh my God.
Anyhow, Katherine Johnson, she was born as Creola Catherine Coleman in August 1918 in a place called White Sulphur Springs in West Virginia, which is a tiny, tiny little place. It's described as a city, but as of the 2010 census, it has a population of 2,400, which is only slightly higher than the village where I grew up.
Whoa.
So it's a very small place.
Literal country roads.
That's going to be in my head for the rest of the day now.
You're welcome.
So she was the youngest of 4 children. Her mother was a teacher and her father was a lumberman, a farmer and a handyman. And he also worked for some time at a place called the Greenbrier Hotel, which is this incredible luxury resort that still exists today and has been open since 1778 and has hosted 26 presidents. So it's a very fancy place.
We'll add it to our tour.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you learned about kind of West Virginia in that time and what was going on, what things were like?
It's a bit shit, to be honest.
Fair.
So I had a kind of spin out researching this where it's just like, it reminded me a bit of the spin out I went on when we were looking at the formation of the jail system, where it's like, I never for a minute did not believe people when they said that system was systemically and intentionally like racist, you know?
Yeah.
But it's only like and this is the importance of teaching history, is it's only when I look at this, I see how much of a feature and not a bug it is.
Oh yeah, it's intentional at every level. Absolutely.
It's fucking disgusting. So anyway, I mean, back in the 17th century, it was like a colonial settlement that had too much land and too few workers. So we'd lots of indentured servants, black and white, and enslaved people. I found lots of disturbing information about how they then made the marriage laws in that area to protect white men who were raping the enslaved women.
Oh, God.
And they changed like the inheritance laws that it follows the mother's line for specifically that reason too. They also brought in a law that like a woman wasn't allowed, you know, she was basically penalized for being pregnant while in her enslavement or indentured servitude by having to work more time, but she couldn't work that for the same master. So it was basically these men, white men who were friends, swapping the women for years.
Oh, God.
You know? So I'm like, the very soil of the foundation of America has this fucking shit in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's disgusting. But like then around the 1890s, there was the Populist Party came in and started making a strong pitch for the common interests around black and white sharecroppers and tenants. And it was written into the US Constitution that runaway slaves and servants from another colony were always returned. The Constitution. So,
oh God.
yeah, West Virginia was,
This is horrible.
yeah, their economy was mostly subsistence farming and timber harvesting. And it was a sparsely populated region. The workforce was small. But then the construction of railroads started and it needed a larger workforce. People came to fill also lots of coal mining jobs. So around the time this woman, that Katherine, was born, it was a time of like African Americans migrating to West Virginia through major rail centers, and they came looking for jobs and economic and political opportunities that were denied to them in other states to escape the Jim Crow laws, which segregated them and denied them voting rights in other states. But, you know, West Virginia provided better education opportunities for their children, but it still wasn't great. So, like, at the start of this big influx in 1870, there was 18,000 African Americans living in West Virginia. And by 1910, the population had grown to 64,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and eventually reaching 115,000. We've mentioned this in a previous episode as well, the Great Migration between 1910 and 1920, 1930 area. African Americans by the thousands poured into those industrial cities to find work and fill labour shortages, which were also created by World War I. But they were confronted with discrimination, socially sanctioned segregation, and racial violence, you know, born of white resistance. So in the time this one was alive, there was still massive discrimination in employment, segregation in schools and public accommodation. Northern black men had fewer barriers to voting, and as their votes increased, it emerged as a crucial factor in elections. That kind of boosted self-confidence in African Americans that manifested in the New Negro movement of the 1920s. And then this organization called the NAACP came about. And there was two co-founders of that. One was William English Walling, but one was a woman.
Oh!
Which is cool. So William English Walling, he did a lot of writing and anti-lynching campaigning. And one of these articles got the attention of Mary White Ovington. And she wrote a letter offering her support. She was a social worker and a freelance writer. And she was an officer in the NAACP for 40 years. She was from a wealthy abolitionist family, and she became a socialist while studying at Radcliffe College. And she wrote a book called Half a Man in 1911 about Black Manhattan. And she had a crucial role. She recruited women into the ranks, mediated disputes, and guided the transition to Black leadership. And she was just always kind of knocking around in the background, but ultimately handed the running back to African American people for their own organization. So this lot, the NAACP, from 1909, kind of were working for the abolition of segregation, discrimination, disenfranchisement, and racial violence, particularly lynching. So in the time, like Katherine was born in 1918, so these lot were just always working in the background for stuff. And this is just as well something that spun me out about this episode is I can't believe this woman, is she still alive?
She's not, but she only died in 2020.
So I can't believe a woman who worked for NASA was alive at a time when there was an anti-lynching bill brought the year she was born, 1918. And it called for prosecution of lynchers, you know, monetary compensation for victims and families of victims. That motion was thrown out from the Senate by a filibuster by the Southern Democrats.
Oh, God.
So, like, that's the year she's born. And then, God, the last recorded lynching in America was in 1981.
What?
Yeah, but since 2000, there's been at least 8 suspected in Mississippi.
Oh, God.
So...
Wow, all in the same state.
That's
shocking.
I'm just like, how can that even happen? That this...
how is that happening, like, today?
This woman who goes on to do great things is alive in a time where people who do this shit are protected by law.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I always want people to understand about these horrifying things that we talk about is this is not ancient history.
Yes.
Like, there are probably still... I mean, Catherine was 101 when she died in 2020. There were probably still a very small handful of people who are alive today who were alive then. This is not ancient history. This is recent.
Yeah, so I mean, did she go to school? I've got like some information about school segregation, but did she attend school?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned about the kind of slightly better educational opportunities in West Virginia. So yes, from a very early age, she demonstrated very strong mathematical abilities. And originally, she and her siblings attended school in Greenbrier County, where they lived. But that area only offered public schooling for African American students up to the 8th grade. So that 8th grade is what, 12 or 13?
Yikes.
It's young. It's very early teens.
Mm.
So the family arranged for their children to go to a place called Institute, West Virginia, which is about 120 miles away. And they went to a high school there, which was located on the campus of the West Virginia State College. Katherine was 10 years old when she enrolled in this high school, and she graduated at the age of 14.
Wow.
And of course, 18 is a typical sort of age. So clearly very, very bright, brilliant student. And that was very apparent from her childhood. And thankfully, her parents were willing and able to make this happen, send them to school in this area where that was possible. So during the time that the children were at that school, they split their time and they were in institute during the school year and then back home in White Silver Springs in the summer.
Was it a boarding school?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think the family just lived there during the school year and then went home for the summer. So once she'd graduated from this high school, again, at the age of 14, she matriculated at West Virginia State College, which was a historically black college, and took every single course in maths that the college offered.
Wow.
Yeah. And she had various mentors, one of whom was a mathematician called William Schiefelin Claytor, who was the third African-American to receive a doctorate in mathematics and the first to publish in a mathematical research journal.
Wow.
And he added new maths courses just for her.
Yes! Oh my God.
There was an interview with her much later where she's quoted as saying, "Many professors tell you that you'd be good at this or that, but they don't always help you with that career path. Professor Claytor made sure I was prepared to be a research mathematician."
Beautiful. So it wasn't until like 1951 that there was the Brown versus Board Education Landmark Supreme Case that outlawed segregation in public schools.
Was that across the whole country, presumably?
Yes. So Article 12 of the West Virginia Constitution said white and coloured persons shall not be taught in the same school. In 1951, there was the National Brown versus Board Education Landmark Supreme Court case that outlawed that, but that sentence in the Constitution wasn't removed until 1994.
What?
Yeah. And even then, 42% of West Virginia voters and 16 counties voted to keep it in the Constitution.
What?
Yeah.
Even though presumably it hadn't actually been practiced for years because it was illegal on a federal level.
Yeah, it was mute.
Yeah.
So
that is wild.
I found this really great article from a guy called David Gutman in the West Virginia Gazette. And it was an article called "West Virginia Has a Complicated History with Race and Civil Rights." And it's from 2014, but it was updated in 2017. His article was great because he interviewed some of the people that were alive then.
Oh.
One lady who's Mary Booker, who was 82, she could have an account in the department store. But when it came to having lunch in that department store, she had to sit outside. So it's like her money was good enough, but she couldn't eat there.
Wow.
By the end of 1957 school year, only 20 counties were considered fully desegregated. There was protests against the integration in McDowell and Mercer counties. And in 1958, a junior integrated high school in Monongalia County was bombed. So that's 6 years after that Supreme Court case. And then 10 years later, there was research done by the West Virginia Human Rights Commission, which found that 40% of Black students still went to all Black schools. In the 7 counties with the most Black students, 7 out of 10 Black students still attended all Black schools. And again, Mary Booker, she said the law has passed and you're allowed to attend, but they don't have to make it comfortable for you.
Yeah.
So she said, like, a teacher said to her daughter, "You're here, but I don't really want you here."
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't a fight to go, but it was a fight to stay, you know?
Yeah.
And Mary Booker also had her own story of being the first black office manager of a department store in Charlestown. And
Oh.
like customers would drop money on the counter instead of touching her, or like
Mm-hmm.
the same Human Rights Commission found that like there's a general compliance within that bill, but named and shamed this one restaurant. The White Pantry restaurant in Huntingdon was still practicing segregation in 1964, so 10 years after the law changed. And that was still around swimming pools.
Wow.
So it was another place in South Charleston where the owner basically refused to integrate the swimming pool, and he got thousands of pounds in donations for the support, going to court to get an injunction against protesters.
Mm-hmm.
And the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964 as well. So we've got even more laws saying this shit isn't okay.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was still like the stadium in West Virginia was still segregated until 73.
Wow. It is so shocking how recent this is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something I really wanted to achieve with this podcast, was just like, these are remarkable women, but for every one like her, where she just both like what she was born with and the opportunities that came her way, went on to have an extraordinary life. There's like, you know, 200 that were just lost, you know?
Yeah. All those people that we don't hear about, whose names we don't know, because they were just denied those opportunities by racism and bigotry.
Yeah, or that we don't know the mental tax that happened to Katherine because of all this in the background, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So college, her university was, I mean, it sounds like it was fucking amazing, you know? Like...
It really sounds like it. Yeah, absolutely. So she graduated summa cum laude in 1937, which means with highest praise, and it's an award that's typically given to the top kind of 1 to 5% of a graduating class. So she's 18 at this point. She's just graduated college at 18, which is the age that students typically go to college.
Yeah, she's graduating with top class.
I know, it's incredible. So she graduated with degrees in mathematics and French. And while she was at university, she was a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, which was the first kind of intercollegiate, historically African-American sorority. And it still exists today. Still around. And it's got kind of thousands of members across the country.
That's amazing.
So after she graduated, she moved to a place called Marion in Virginia to take a teaching job at a black public school. But then... in 1939, she was selected to be one of the first 3 African-American students and the only woman to enroll in a graduate program at West Virginia University. And this was the point at which West Virginia University was being integrated. So there was this Supreme Court ruling in 1938 called, it's a bit of a mouthful, called Missouri ex rel Gaines v. Canada, which essentially the ruling was that it required states that provided public higher education to white students to also provide it to black students. And they could do that either by...
Yay!
Yeah, and they could do that either by establishing all black colleges and universities as well, or by admitting black students to previously white-only universities. So they could do that either way, but they had to provide that to black students as well.
So that's 1939. Oh my god. And some of the shit I was just talking about happened in the 70s. And she's already, oh my god.
38 was that ruling. It's really bizarre, isn't it?
So she's the first in the door from that. That's so great.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of only 3 African-American students, as I said, and the other 2 were men. So she went there to study mathematics, but she left pretty quickly because she got married to her first husband, James Goebel, and they decided to start a family. So they had 3 daughters, Constance, Joylette, and Catherine. And then when they got older, she returned to teaching. And all this time, she knew that what she really wanted was to be a research mathematician. That was a difficult field for women to get into, and particularly for African-American women.
Yeah, and she has the added adversity of, you know, when you get married, you fucking stop everything.
Yeah, absolutely. These very strong societal assumptions about what marriage and motherhood means for women. And to be fair, it sounds like her husband was really, really supportive, which is lovely. But still, I can't imagine that she didn't feel those societal norms and pressures.
Yeah, because I think if you're facing so many microaggressions all the time for just looking the way you look and doing the things you do, then being like, and I'm going to be married and a mom and stay in this. It's just like, that's just too much to put on one woman to blaze through, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, at a family gathering in 1952, she heard from a relative that this organisation called the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which was a precursor to what is now NASA, was hiring mathematicians specifically for this West Area Computing section, which was an all-black section at this organisation. So she applied, but the positions had already been filled for that year. So she applied again the following year, and then she was hired. This was 1953. She was hired to work at what was then the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory, which is now, it's still there, but it's now the Langley Research Centre, and that's based in Hampton, Virginia. And she worked as what they called a computer. So essentially these women's, their jobs was to analyse various kind of mathematical things. One of the examples that this source says is things like gust alleviation for aircraft. So they're doing all these very, very complicated mathematical equations related to these various sort of aeronautical things that are happening.
Yeah, that are saving people's lives, you know?
Oh, yeah,
making
absolutely.
sure shit doesn't crash and go into flames. It's like just amazing.
Yeah. The West Area Computer section was supervised by a woman called Dorothy Vaughan, who was also a black woman from West Virginia and a mathematician, also a total badass, and we could do a whole episode on her. And after just a couple of weeks in the job, Katherine was assigned to a project, something called the Maneuver Loads branch of the Flight Research Division. And after not very long, that became a permanent position, essentially. So there's this really interesting quote from a kind of oral history of this period, and I'm just going to read the whole thing because I think it's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it reads, "At first, Johnson worked in a pool of women performing math calculations. Katherine has referred to the women in this pool as virtual computers who wore skirts.
Mm-hmm.
Their main job was to read the data from the black boxes of planes and carry out other precise mathematical tasks. Then one day, Katherine and a colleague were temporarily assigned to help the all-male flight research team. Katherine's knowledge of analytical geometry helped to make quick allies of male bosses and colleagues to the extent that, quote, they forgot to return me to the pool. While the racial and gender barriers were always there, Katherine says she ignored them. Katherine was assertive, asking to be included in editorial meetings when no woman had gone before. She simply told people she had done the work and that she belonged."
Yes.
Yes.
What year is this?
So this is the early 1950s, so 1953, 54.
Oh my God. So we're talking about pre-Martin Luther King Jr. here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is the early 50s. So for the next 4 years, she worked on this team analysing data from flight tests, and specifically she was involved with an investigation into a plane crash.
Mm.
And she was just wrapping up that project in December of 1956 when her husband James died of cancer.
Oh no.
Yeah, so he was 43, so pretty young really, and she was 38. She's widowed, she's got 3 daughters, all of whom are still in high school, and suddenly she's on her own. So I just can't imagine. There's very little about sort of how she coped with that I could find, but wow, what a lot to deal with.
I wonder if also the decision to like not work when her kids were young was to do with, you know, she saw the benefit of how much her parents sacrificed for her education, you know.
Yeah.
That is like, she's passing on that rod of like, things will be different for you too. And also I can't believe some people face so much adversity.
I know. They face so much adversity and yet they do so much and achieve so
Yeah.
much. It's just incredible.
So she's a widow on top of everything else now.
So she remarried. So 2 years after James's death in 1958, she met a man called James A. Johnson, who was known as Jim. And he was an officer in the United States Army, and he was a veteran of the Korean War. And they were introduced to each other by the minister at the Carver Memorial Presbyterian Church that they both belonged to. And Katherine sang in the choir there at the time. So that's how they met.
So wholesome.
And they got married the following year in 1959.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the work side of things, she was reassigned to the Guidance and Control Division at Langley's Flight Research Division, where, of course, all the staff were white men, naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So she's surrounded by all these white male engineers, and of course at the time there was still these very strict racial segregation laws. So there was the state's segregation laws, and there was also federal level workplace segregation laws specifically that was introduced by Woodrow Wilson, who was a president in the early 20th century and who was, it's fair to say, a massive racist.
An absolute prick. Can I tell you about another massive prick?
Yes, please do.
There's this guy called Strom Thurmond who ran for president in 1948. And in 1964, he became a Republican because he hated the Civil Rights Act so much.
Of course he did.
And in 1948, when he ran for president, he said, all the laws of Washington and all the bayonets of the army cannot force the Negro into our homes, into our schools, our churches, and our places of recreation and amusement.
Ugh, wow.
I mean, never mind, they were already in people's homes because they're enslaved and they're like running these homes and doing all the fucking hard work that is keeping society going. Oh God, this is awful. Meanwhile, he actually the whole time had an enslaved woman in his home, Carrie Butler, who he had raped and impregnated when she was 16.
Oh.
And that was kept secret until after his death in 2003.
Of course it was.
Yeah, so this is jumping around a lot in the timeline, but I'm like, this woman is like marching into the white workplaces against breaking federal law 10 years, 5 years before this guy ran as Republican and said that quote about like Washington's forcing the Negro into our home. Like,
oh my God.
I've been so angry all fucking week.
Yeah, this is enraging.
And what was it like for Katherine as well then, going into these spaces and knowing you're probably working alongside people who have voted to keep those laws in place?
I just can't even imagine. According to these laws and the state laws that were in place at the time, all the African-American women in this computing pool had to work separately, eat separately, use different bathrooms to their white peers. It was completely separate.
Yeah.
Their office was labelled as, quote, coloured computers.
Ew.
Yeah, it's so horrible.
Yeah, and it was just a given. It was like considered fact that they were like less hygienic or something, you know?
Yeah.
It was just, I imagine people just didn't even question it because it was just so like the sky is blue for most white people, you know?
Yeah. There's a really powerful scene in Hidden Figures, which I don't know if this ever actually happened, but I think it's a good sort of representation of this, even if it's not literally true, where essentially Katherine gets chewed out by her boss for spending too long out of the office going to the bathroom. And she just says to him, well, there's no bathroom in this building that I'm allowed to use. The one I'm allowed to use is half a mile away.
What the fuck?
In another building. Everything is completely separate. What's interesting is there's a quote here from her. So she did this interview with WHRO TV, which is a Virginia station. And she says that she, quote, didn't feel the segregation at NASA because everybody there was doing research. You had a mission and you worked on it, and it was important to you to do your job and play bridge at lunch. I didn't feel any segregation. I knew it was there, but I didn't feel it.
Probably because it was so inherently normalized, you know?
I guess so. I mean, that's what that says to me, is it was just so part of the background noise of life.
You know, and what she's doing there is this, you know, trauma resilience tool of just focusing on what she can control, what she can do, showing up and trying to make her workplace a nice, fulfilling place where she can one day at a time, you know? And fuck me. Like, you know, and I think it is that. I think it is that for women like Katherine, where if they did stop to pause and reflect on the state of the world, they would fall apart, you know?
Yeah, completely. So in 1958, this NACA organization was superseded by NASA. And they started to use digital computers. So the black computing pool was disbanded at that point. And NASA actually banned racial segregation at that point.
Oh, good for NASA.
That was the point at which it kind of stopped being formally segregated. But there was still, you know, lots and lots of discrimination that was pervasive. So there's a quote here, a direct quote from Katherine that I'm just going to read in full because I think it's really interesting, where she says, "We needed to be assertive as women in those days. Assertive and aggressive, and the degree to which we had to be that way depended on where you were. I had to be. In the early days of NASA, women were not allowed to put their names on the reports. No women in my division had her name on a report. I was working with Ted Skopinski, and he wanted to leave and go to Houston. But Henry Pearson, our supervisor, he was not a fan of women, kept pushing him to finish the report we were working on. Finally, Ted told him Katherine should finish the report. She's done most of the work anyway. So Ted left Pearson with no choice. I finished the report and my name went on it. And that was the first time a woman in our division had her name on something.
Yes. And also that's terrible. That's a t-shirt.
And there's a picture here of the paper, and it's called Determination of Azimuth Angle at Burnout for Placing a Satellite Over a Selected Earth Position by T.H. Skopinski and Katherine G. Johnson.
Oh, God, Katherine.
Dated September 1960. Yeah.
I found this amazing resource that I was just saying to Jess. We're going to do a whole episode on this, just analysing this. The American Association of University Women, they have a whole thing about research about women in STEM. And, one of the things it talks about as a barrier is the gender stereotypes and social bias within the gender stereotypes and the lack of role models. So here we have a really clear thing of, of course, there's no visibility for women in STEM. Their names weren't allowed to go on the fucking thing,
Yeah, the work that they did.
The work that they did. And then women just don't work in STEM. They were working in STEM. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they've always been there. They were just not allowed to be front and center.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hence the movie title, Hidden Figures.
Exactly. And the book it was based on, which I'll talk about more in a minute.
Ooh.
Shall we talk about her involvement in the various space missions?
Yes.
In May 1961, 5th of May 1961, a man called Alan Shepard went into space, and he was the second ever person and the first ever American to travel into space. So he was on this rocket for 15 minutes, reached an altitude of 101.2 nautical miles, and this was watched by millions of people.
Wow.
So people just everywhere were tuning into this on TV because this was huge. And this was very shortly after a Russian guy had been the first person in space. And obviously America was not happy about this because there was the whole sort of space race thing going on at this time. So they wanted to do it as quickly as possible. So Katherine was very heavily involved in the various calculations for this. So she calculated the trajectory for the flight. She calculated something called the launch window, which is essentially the time period on the launch day during which a rocket can be launched to reach the target that it's intended to reach. So if it's not launched within that period, then they have to wait until the next launch period. She plotted backup navigation charts for astronauts in case there were any kind of electronic failures. And she also helped to ensure that Shepard's capsule would be recovered quickly after he landed, which of course is a very crucial sort of safety feature. This was a successful flight. It was a huge deal, and it was a major sort of turning point in the space race. And then the following year, there was a man called John Glenn who successfully completed the first orbit around the Earth. And this was when NASA used electronic computers for the first time to calculate the trajectory and the orbit for that. But he wouldn't do it until she'd verified the numbers.
Yes.
Some of the astronauts, they didn't entirely trust these sort of newfangled digital devices, and they wanted, a person they trusted to do it. So famously, John Glenn specifically asked her and refused to fly until she'd verified the calculations. And he's famously quoted as saying of her numbers, "If she says they're good, then I'm ready to go."
Oh, okay. John Glenn is going on our list of men to mention on International Men's Day.
We like him.
Number one ally.
So then there's this book by a woman called Margot Lee Shetterly, and the full title of the book is Hidden Figures, the Story of the African American Women Who Helped Win the Space Race. And that's obviously what the film was based on, about this incident with John Glenn. She says, "So the astronaut who became a hero looked to this black woman in the still segregated South at the time as one of the key parts of making sure his mission would be a success."
Jesus Christ. He trusted her with his life.
Literally. And she talked about how the computing was seen as women's work, the engineering was seen as men's work. And she says, "It really does have to do with us over the course of time, sort of not valuing that work that was done by women, however necessary, as much as we might. And it has taken history to get a perspective on that."
Wow.
Yeah.
What year was this?
So Alan Shepard went into space in 61 and John Glenn's orbit was February 62.
Okay, so 1962, there was still protesters in Birmingham being arrested and attacked, like for protesting against segregation. And it's the year before Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail is issued to the public. And it's a year before his I Have a Dream speech, you know?
Yeah.
She's got this white guy in space. That's crazy. That's so crazy.
It's amazing. The timeline of all of this just really puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Oh, God. What'd you do next?
Yeah, what did she do next? Well, so I said a minute ago that some of the astronauts were a little bit nervous about these digital computers because they weren't sure kind of how good this technology was. So Katherine ended up working directly with the digital computers, and it was partly her reputation and her ability and her accuracy that kind of helped to establish the confidence in that technology. So she kind of helped to prove or to show that it was viable for what they were doing. And perhaps most impressively, in a series of very impressive things, she helped to calculate the trajectory for the 1969 Apollo flight that put men on the moon. Yeah. So while this was happening during the moon landing, she was at a meeting in the Pocono Mountains in northeastern Pennsylvania, and she and a few others had crowded around this little TV set to watch Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin take the first steps on the moon.
Oh my
which
God.
she had helped make happen. And then the following year, she worked on the Apollo 13 moon mission, which was the one that was aborted before they landed. There was an oxygen tank failure, and that's why they brought them back before they ever landed on the moon. And fun fact, this is where the saying, Houston, we have a problem, comes from.
No way.
What he actually said was, okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. And it's popularly misquoted, but yes, that's where that saying comes from. So when that mission was aborted, Katherine worked on some of the kind of backup procedures and things to help get the crew back to Earth safely. And she created something called a one-star observation system that would help them to determine their location more accurately, essentially get them all home in one piece, which they did successfully. And in a 2010 interview, she's quoted as saying, "Everybody was concerned with getting them there. We were concerned about getting them back."
Wow.
Yeah. So she's literally keeping these people alive, helping save these people's lives.
So that's in 1970, is it?
Yes. Yeah.
So she's
Apollo
only
13 was
been
70,
allowed to vote for 5 years.
Yeah. And she's helping put people on the moon.
Like, oh my God, she's conquering the moon. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolute badass. She authored or co-authored 26 research papers during her career.
So probably like add another 20 to that.
Yeah. So from that first one that she and her colleague had to fight to get her name on.
Yeah.
And she finally retired in 1986 after working there for 33 years. And she spent her later years of life encouraging students to go into STEM fields. And she's always been considered a role model for careers in STEM, particularly for girls and for young women and presumably for Black girls in particular.
I bet she's a part of that organization I mentioned, the American Association of University Women.
Yeah.
Yeah, their website's amazing, and it's all about education. And so, yeah, they have here that like women make up only 28% of the workforce in science, technology, engineering and maths, which is STEM, and men vastly outnumber them in most STEM fields in college. And the gender gaps are particularly high in the fastest growing and highest paid jobs like computer science and engineering. 30 years ago, there were 13 boys for every girl who scored above 700 on the SAT math exam at age 13, and today that has shrunk to about 3 to 1. The increase in the number of girls identified as mathematically gifted suggests that it's their access to education is what's made the difference.
Yeah.
So a bit like Katherine getting courses made for her.
Yeah.
So while there is biological differences still aren't well understood, they're not the whole story, because just a difference in access has made that big leap. Right,
absolutely. It's never been about different ability. It's always been about different levels of access and different levels of support.
Under gender stereotypes, they do say that men score better in spatial skills, but actually, once given some very basic training in spatial skills, women were brought up to on a par with men. And they cite some really interesting studies about like maths anxiety and things like in a lab situation when women are like with a female teacher who also has poor belief in their own maths ability, the little girls pick up on that and score lower. But
Yeah.
when they're given like some affirmation and praise just before, say, taking a maths test, they score higher on a par with the boys. So
Mm-hmm.
it is access, and then it's, you know, it's a bit like what we were saying with the segregation. You know, it's like it's not just enough for access, but it needs to be easy to be there, you
Yeah.
know, as well. So God, it's so fucking interesting, and I just can't believe Catherine got to where she got against all those odds.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Remember I told you that she married her second husband in 1959?
Yes.
Well, they were married for 60 years.
Oh,
Essentially, they were together for most of the rest of her life. He died in 2019 at the age of 93. Do you want to hear about some of the honours and some of the awards that she's received?
oh, give me all of them.
Okay, get ready. I don't think I could find all of them, but I have a list. So she was named West Virginia State College Outstanding Alumnus of the Year in 1999.
Whoa.
She has 2 NASA facilities named in her honour. So there's the Katherine G. Johnson Computational Research Facility in Hampton, Virginia, which was named in 2016, and she attended the official opening in 2017. And the Independent Verification and Validation Facility in Fairmont, West Virginia, was renamed to the Katherine Johnson Independent Verification and Validation Facility in February 2019. She was included on the BBC's 100 Women of Influence list in 2016. She has honorary doctorates from the College of William and Mary in Virginia, the State University of New York at Farmingdale, Capital College in Maryland, Old Dominion University in Virginia, West Virginia University, and Spelman College in Georgia.
Oh my God.
West Virginia State University has a STEM scholarship named in her honour, and also has a statue of her on their campus.
Yes.
And the scholarship is awarded to undergraduate students in the STEM fields, with first preference being given to African American students in the mathematics department.
Do it.
I liked this one. Her likeness was made into a Barbie doll, complete with a little NASA badge, in 2018 as part of this Inspiring Women series that they did.
Oh.
And I know.
Represent.
And some of the other women whose likenesses they used included Maya Angelou, Helen Keller, and Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh my God. Okay, well, yeah, we need to have this collection.
She was announced as one of the members of the inaugural class of Government Executive Publications Government Hall of Fame in 2019. She has schools named after her in Bethel, Washington, Sacramento, California, and Fairfax, Virginia. In November 2020, a satellite named after her, which was called NewSat 15 or Catherine, was launched into space. In 2021, Northrop Grumman named its Cygnus NG-15 spacecraft that supplies the International Space Station as the SS Katherine Johnson in her honour. She received the Distinguished West Virginian Award from Governor Earl Ray Tomblin. She was recognised as one of 24 Black inventors and scientists at the Afro-American Historical and Cultural Museum in Philadelphia. In 2015, President Barack Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom for being a pioneering African-American woman in STEM, and that's the highest award that can be bestowed on an American civilian.
Whoa.
Yeah, and she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 2021.
Yeah. Bloody hell.
And that's like not even the full list. That's just some.
She uses accolades as like a wallpaper. She's like, so many pieces of paper telling me I'm great. I love her.
Yeah. And she lived long enough to see the movie Hidden Figures, which portrayed her story.
Oh my God.
So she appeared alongside Taraji Henson, who plays her, at the Academy Awards in 2017, and she received a standing ovation from the audience there.
Oh my God.
She was asked what she thought of the movie, and she said, "It was well done. The 3 leading ladies did an excellent job portraying us."
Yay!
Yeah. There's a TV series called Timeless, which is about a group of time travelers who go to sort of various periods of history. It's quite good, actually. I recommend it. There's a 2016 episode called Space Race, in which she's featured, and she's played by Nadine Ellis. So she died at a retirement home in Newport News, Virginia on February 24th, 2020 at the age of 101.
Oh my goodness.
And a man called Jim Bridenstine, who was the NASA administrator at the time from 2018 to 2021, described her as an American hero and said, quote, "Her pioneering legacy will never be forgotten."
Oh my God, that's so true.
And I just want to finish with a quote from Charles Bolden, who was another NASA administrator from 2009 to 2017. And he said, "She's one of the greatest minds ever to grace our agency or our country. And because of the trail she blazed, young Americans like my granddaughters can pursue their own dreams without a feeling of inferiority. Catherine's legacy is a big part of the reason that my fellow astronauts and I were able to get to space. It's also a big part of the reason that today there is space for women and African Americans in the leadership of our nation, including the White House."
Not enough space.
Yeah. More space needed. But yes. So that is the story.
Yay! Oh my God, that's so exciting. That's such a great story.
Right. She was such a badass. She was awesome.
Well done, Jess.
Thanks.
You know, I guess the thing I'm learning from today's episode is like, you know, be like Katherine. There's all this shit going on in the world, but just, you know, get up in the mornings and have a think about what am I actually in control of and how can I show up to that in a way that is kind and gracious to make things better in that small bubble, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much about this. That is so inspiring. I think the thing for me that really sticks out more than anything is that bit about her just saying, "Well, I did the work. I belong here."
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Logical.
Brilliant. Take up space. Take credit for your own work. Love it. So some of my sources I realised I didn't mention my sources at the beginning. So my starting point was Wikipedia. Shocking. Well, no, my starting point was Hidden Figures, but, you know, movies are not a primary source. So my starting point was her Wikipedia page, and then there was various sort of sources that I used. So the NASA website has quite a lot of information about her, unsurprisingly. Both of the universities that she attended, West Virginia University and West Virginia State, both had some quite interesting stuff about her on their websites. And there was also this site called Women and the American Story, which has got lots of interesting stories about various awesome women from history. I'll put some of the links in the show notes, but quite a lot of interesting sources for this. Yeah, and thanks for your background research as well. Even though it's so sad and upsetting, it does really give context to the story, and I think frames even more like how amazing this woman was.
Yeah, it was fucking hard. Donate to our Patreon for a therapy session for me this week. I had some amazing sources too.
Oh yeah, tell me about those.
This really good website called United States Civil Rights Trail. Again, Jess, when we go on tour, you can just plan a whole holiday around seeing famous spots to do at the civil rights movement, and you can click by state as well, which is really cool.
Donate to our Patreon to send us on tour.
Yeah, for a holiday where we can learn even more about how terrible the world is. Notevenpast.org is a great website, and they had a transcript of a 2017 IHS Roundtable reflecting on the Loving versus Virginia case after 50 years. There was some great speakers at that. It was so interesting. And then nps.gov, loc.gov, and I've mentioned the other two, David Gutman and the American Association of University Women. There's just some fascinating shit out there.
So this is the part of the show where we shout out our wonderful supporters on Patreon. So we have a tier on our Patreon which is called Co-Conspirator, which is anyone who's giving us €10 and above every month. And we said that we would give them a shout out on the show to just say how fabulous they are and how much we appreciate them. So, Grace, do you want to tell us about our lovely co-conspirators?
Shout out to Wazen dear. You are very dear to our Wazes. And my beautiful friend, Charlotte Hadley. I love you so much. You're an absolute babe.
Oh, thank you both so much. And if you would like to get your name on the show, then head over to patreon.com/womenvseverything and support us at the €10 a month level or above.
Even $1, baby.
Right. Is it gratitude corner time?
Oh yeah, I forgot we do this.
We do this every week and we always forget to plan things.
I am really grateful that like I pushed through and showed up to this today, because I was like, I could put it off, but I know I'm just going to be stressed, and having the deadline really stopped me going down dark rabbit holes. And, you know, I'm really grateful the individual Katherine Johnson story is so amazing and hopeful, and it's taught me so much.
Yeah.
And brought me back to that like primary purpose message of trauma recovery. And yeah, I'm really grateful for that. And it's nice weather here. I'm really grateful that I went for a walk, and yeah, I'm just really grateful. Like, I'm really happy to be alive, you know, like,
Good. I'm also happy you're alive.
you know, it's just, I've been very unwell different times in the last 5 years. And I'm like, God, I've been pretty happy to be alive for a significant amount of time now. And that's so great, you know? So thanks for sticking with me and making the world a better place, Jess. What are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for travel. Because it's obviously been difficult the last couple of years to do much of that, which I really missed. So yeah, I'm grateful that I got to go on a lovely little adventure and sit in the sun and get in the sea and all of those nice things. But it's just very grounding somehow, you know. I think just sitting on warm sand and watching the waves is very peaceful, and yeah, it was lovely. So I am very grateful for that.
Oh, Jess and I were just talking before recording that, like, I was also invited to Steph's wedding, and sorry I couldn't go, Steph, but when she invited us was back in January, and it felt like overseas travel was another lifetime away, and now it's only May, and it's like that standard of reality has changed to like, oh, of course you went on a holiday, you know? Like,
yeah, and honestly, it wasn't that different. I had to do a couple more bits of paperwork before I went, and I had to wear a mask on the plane. But other than that, it was just like the before times. Like, I barely thought about COVID for 4 days. It was great.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I have a mini break to Dublin.
Oh, exciting.
At the start of next month. So that'll be my foray into travel for now. I'm still a bit like, I'm hoping to do a flight somewhere, maybe in the autumn.
Sounds good. Okay, that is it for this week. So we will sign off and we'll see you next time. But until then, take credit for your own work and love women. Bye!
Bye! One of these episodes I actually did research and didn't just listen to other people's podcasts and steal their words. Primary source, bitch.